What's going on, Tamers? It's me, E, starting my slow evolution from Numemon to Digimon. I don't look that homeless yet, do I? So BT17 released last week and kicked off with a bang thanks in part to the special opening week tournaments that featured a very special Alphamon prize card. This week is also great because we have the first full week of Evolution Cup results over here in Asia. For folks who are unfamiliar with what the Evolution Cups are, think of them as the steps for Asian players to qualify to get to the World Championships. They start locally and then move to regionals, and then finally a representative is found through the national tournaments for each country. Which means players are gunning for wins to qualify. And through all of this chaos, a deck from BT17 has emerged as a frontrunner, dethroning the likes of Numemon as well as the Numemon deck. To learn more, let's take a look at some event results, a couple of key takeaways, and a close look at some of the decks that topped over the course of the past week. If you watched last week's video, then like me, looking at today's results, you're probably a little bit blindsided seeing Blue Hybrid featuring AncientGaruru here at the top. For the first time in a while, it feels like we finally found a deck that dethrones not only Numemon, but also the armor decks that are running around out there. And that's because the AncientGaruru deck here threads the needle on three important points for the game right now. Those are multiple attacks, having the ability to bypass blockers, and the ability to bounce cards back to hand instead of destroying them. This combined with the draw power and the ability to recycle tamers for the deck makes it very formidable. The other decks, however, aren't really that far off. We've got things like Imperialdramon, my current favorite right now, Digimon, Numemon, as well as ShineGreymon and Vaccine Armor deck, all right on its heels. Another cool thing here is that there's such a wide spread of decks at the champion level that nothing ends up hitting the mega level because there's so many viable decks to use right now. Some nice additions to this list that we didn't see last week include things like the Pulsemon deck you see here, as well as Tyrant Kabuterimon, thank God, and also Gallantmon, which is one of the decks that I'm most interested in right now. From the onset, Gallantmon felt like a deck that was really difficult to build because there are so many different options at level 6. Do you go like the milling route using the old Imperialdramon cards, or do you go a bit more offensive using the BT12 Gallantmon with the raid ability? Or maybe even more defensive using the new BT17 Gallantmon that can buff his DP and gain blocker. And then within all of this, like, where does the Megadramon Ace even fit in? There's a lot of decisions that are made here that really influence the rest of the deck and the way you play it. And then finally, if you look at the rookie level and below here, you see that pretty much every deck that was introduced or got support in BT17 is represented here, and that I think speaks to the good design of this set as a whole. You can pretty much just put together whatever you want and give it a shot. So the first deck we're going to take a look at this week is going to be the Pulsemon deck, which we saw before. Now last week we took a close look at how the FenriLoogamon deck has changed with the addition of the new secret rare FenriLoogamon Takemikazuchi. The FenriLoogamon deck actually uses the level 6 from this deck, the Kazuchimon here, as a way to get to their level 7, but this deck can technically do the opposite to also get to the Takemikazuchi. Gonna keep it a buck before I get started here. I am not the leading scientist on Pulsemon technology, so if I miss something, folks who are more knowledgeable, do me a favor, hit me up in the comments below. I would love to learn more, and I'm sure the folks watching would also love to do the same. Diving into the deck though, we've got first off at the level 3s here, 4 copies of the Searcher Pulsemon from BT16, and 4 copies of the BT17 Pulsemon, the SR here. This guy lets you slot in a Leon Alexander from hand up underneath him, and then if you have 3 or more security, you gain 1 memory. If you have 2 or below, you actually recover. Keep in mind that this is the one time, I think, in the entire deck that it's not 3 or more or 3 and less. Where lots of the other cards here are going to follow that trend. If you have 3 or more security, you gain an effect, and if you have 3 or less security, you gain an effect. That means if you're at 3, you get both effects. This is the only card that doesn't give you both effects because you're either at 3 and above or 2 and lower. My guess is maybe they were afraid that if you gave them both effects, it would be too strong, especially for level 3. The level 4s for this deck fill a lot of really useful slots. The first up going to be 4 copies of the Bulkmon, which you see here, who's just useful for suspending Digimon to attack them down and also give them DP minus. And because a lot of cards in this deck can trash security, as a way to keep yourself healthy and keep you at that 3 minimum threshold to get both effects from many cards, he's also going to let you recover 1 whenever you trash security once per turn if he has a Leon Alexander in his sources. Some of the most potent removal in the game right now includes the likes of things like DP minus as well as D-Digivolution, and the 3 copies of the Numemon here that you see is a great defense against both of them. If you have 3 security or more, he can prevent both those effects from affecting this card for a turn, and then if you have 3 or less, he gives that Digimon blocker and reboot. Rounding out the level 4s, we actually have 2 copies of the Numemon, which you see on the very side here, and he's really only useful, I think, if you have 3 or less security, because he gives you +1 memory on Digivolve, which makes him a 1 cost to get to level 4. And if you include the memory plus that you can get from the Pulsemon here, then you essentially get a free Digivolution to the level 4 slot. Moving on to level 5, this deck utilizes both the Boutmon from BT17 as well as the Climbmon, I think, from BT16, both of which have some very useful effects. The Climbmon here, if you're at that 3 security threshold, he's going to give you 2 card draw, and you can play a 6,000 or lower DP Digimon with Pulsemon in its name. And of course, that's typically going to involve pretty much anything at level 4s and below. However, there is a level 5 Digimon that fits the criteria, and that is one copy you see here. It's kind of hard to see him, but this is the Pulsemon, I think, from BT16. And when you drop him, he's going to give you +2 memory, which means that the Climon here can become a 1-cost Digivolve that nets you 2 card draw and a second body on board. The Batmon conversely has what I would call Barrier Plus, in that anytime he be removed from board once per turn, you can just drop a security and then keep him there. And then he has another effect where whenever you drop a security, he can freely Digivolve into a card with Pulsemon in its text somewhere. What's really important about both of these guys is that they both have the same inheritance effect, that whenever you would attack, at the end of the attack, you can drop a security and then you can become unsuspended. The poster boy level 6 for the deck, the Kazuchimon here, is somewhat useful in the form that he can suspend a Digimon and then also give a blanket security attack minus to your opponent's entire board for a turn. He has an end of turn effect that lets you recover and then attack, but I'm not sure how useful that is, considering you're probably always going to be going into the Takemikazuchi before that end of turn effect happens. The game plan here I think is pretty simple. You just get your Kazuchimon while also making sure you have 1 memory left over, and then once you do that, you can just hard play the FenriLoogamon, and even though you would be giving your opponent 11 memory and putting them at 10, you can just use the Takemikazuchi from trash to DNA Digivolve into him and then set it back to 3. You get all the advantages of the Takemikazuchi. I do worry a little bit sometimes about making sure that you have enough security to make all the effects happen, especially Takemikazuchi's you drop a security, they drop a security. One way that you can accomplish this is by using cards like Hacker's Pride, where if you have a Digimon with that's level 4 or somewhere else on the board, you can just peel the top card off of that stack, put on your security so you have something left over as a cost for Takemikazuchi's ability to both players remove security cards. The Hacker's Pride card is also pretty useful just because it gives you memory whenever you put that card back on top of your security, and the initial effect is just to search cards out. I don't think I mentioned it before, but the Leon Alexander as well as the 3 copies of the Hacker Judge card are great additions to this deck because they give you barrier and blocker. This is a really useful way for you to set your security to 3 by either running your Digimon in or having them block knowing they've be destroyed and then dropping a security to make sure you're at that threshold so you can get both effects from lots of cards. Honestly, going into this deck, I didn't know much about it, but after like going through the cards and kind of looking how the effects fit together, I'm kind of interested in the deck. The next list we're going to look at is going to be Imperialdramon, and I imagine this one is going to be pretty short because honestly this deck doesn't change too much from its BT16 incarnation. The lower end looks pretty familiar with the use of the Vmon search cards as well as the Wormmon search cards. A couple copies of the promo movie Vmon because he can Digivolve at cost -1, and then also 2 copies of the older starter deck Vmon who can search out free trade cards, which essentially is everything in the deck. For the level 4s, this deck changes things up a little bit in the form of the 3 copies of the Numemon from the Double Typhoon starter deck. While you are making the deck a bit more blue heavy at the level 4 focus, it is some decent defense if it gets checked in security and you have a Vmon on the board, as well as a nice source of removal in the form of source stripping your opponent's cards and then bouncing cards that have no sources back to hand. The level 5s and level 6s don't really change much for the deck either. We got 2 copies of the BT12 Imperialdramon to source strip everything. We've got 1 copy of the starter deck Imperialdramon, who can attack twice, and then bottom deck I think a 6k or lower, and then 4 copies of the basically mandatory BT16 Imperialdramons who have Partition, who can rest everything, can make multiple checks, as well as at the level 6s here, 3 copies of the Imperialdramon Dragon mode, 1 copy of the BT12 Fighter mode, and then 2 Fighter mode aces. And then here at the far right side, for some reason, we've got 2 copies of the Imperialdramon Paladin mode ace card. This guy is a menace, being able to essentially source strip everything, and then he can keep attacking as long as your opponent has no Digimon with sources on the board. He can also bottom deck a player's entire trash, which is really useful, but I think is a bit more matchup dependent. For example, if you're running against something like 7 Great Demon Lords, and this is an easy answer, right? And looking at the option, this deck has gutted out all of the copies of the Invincible Dragon Insect Fusion option card from BT16, and instead gone with 3 copies of Return to Ancestors from BT17, considering this card is so good. For essentially 2 costs, you can Digivolve into any level 5 or higher Digimon in the deck. A bit of a mystery though about this list is that if you look and count very closely, it's only 49 cards, and this 1 orange card here is left turned over as what I assume to be a secret tech. I'm not sure what it could be, but what do you guys think it could be? Let me know in the comments below. And the last list we're going to take a look at today is going to be the AncientGaruru focused blue hybrid deck I talked about before. It combines a lot of the best parts of red hybrid with the very specific abilities from the Koji Tamer and the AncientGaruru here to make multiple checks and bypass blocker. The lower end of the deck is really offensive and focuses on actually cards from the red hybrid package here in things like the Flamon from BT12, and the Kodomon here to get card draw very quickly. You're probably wondering why they're using the Red Flamemon from BT17 here, and that's because he can search out hybrid cards and tamers of any color. Additionally, it's a 4-4 split here on the Ukamon, so you got 4 copies of the Memory Gain Ukamon as well as 4 copies of the Searcher Ukamon from BT16, and 2 copies of the Pokemon here for the extra deep search through the deck. The new 4-cost Koji Tamer is a memory setter, which means he's going to give you 3 memory every single turn, and he gives you jamming whenever you add a card to your hand by some effect. And then the older Koji card is actually the more interesting and the more useful one right now, and that is because he gives your Digimon the ability to not be blocked. And in the case of things like Magnamon Armor, that is a godsend. You can use cards like the Ancient Guardian Deity option card here to get down either your Tamers for a cheap cost or to get down your level 6 for a super cheap cost at, I believe, cost -4 whenever you play them. And because the AncientGarurumon is also a Digicross card, he can already reduce his cost as well. Speaking of getting to your AncientGarurumon, another way you can do that is using the new BT17 Lobomon, who lets you Digivolve into the AncientGarurumon for 3 costs, but then destroys it at the end of the turn. But you don't actually mind that, because the AncientGarurumon lets you take a Tamer back and a hybrid card from the trash when he's deleted, and you can play a Tamer for free. He can recycle the Koji cards here really easily, and you can kind of build up your stack of Tamers to be used for Digivolutions for hybrids later on. The blue-yellow split for this deck is very nice because it gives you a little bit of flexibility for the level 5s, and 1 copy of the Beowulfmon here, who's a little bit of removal, as well as 1 copy of the Jet Sylphimon, which is also restricted to 1 per deck, for a little bit of recovery. Another way to push offense in this deck is utilizing level 3s here. Not only the Ukamon's gonna let you hatch eggs and move Digimon out immediately, but also you've got 3 copies of the Rui Tamer here to do the same thing. The Hacker Judge Tamer here is an interesting choice. I suppose giving any Digimon blocker and barrier is actually really useful. And then finally, the deck features some very nasty option cards here, especially if these are checked in security, things like Crimson Blaze, Heaven's Judgment, as well as 1 copy of the Ice Wall, all to hamper and slow down your opponent. One of the drawbacks of this deck is that if your opponent doesn't have a Digimon to bounce on board back to hand, then the AncientGarurumon here feels a little bit, I don't know, lackluster, and you kind of have to make up with other offense from the level 3s and level 4s, but if they do have that card on the board, then he's very good. I'm really interested in seeing the evolution of this deck, with the blue-yellow split between all the cards, the ability to use other color hybrids and things like the red cards, which you see here, as well as other cards that really are unexplored at this point. But all in all, a very exciting deck, and I'm looking forward to what next week's results bring. And with that, we're going to bring week 2 of the BT17 Secret Crisis meta report to a close. It's a really exciting time for Digimon right now. There's so much cool stuff that you can do and like try out with decks. Like the blue hybrid is a great example. Pulsemon, I mean, just looking at it got me interested. People have been talking about things like Aosmon as well as other decks out there like Diabordomon. Really feels like there's a lot to explore. Anyways, folks, I'm going to get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.